For 32-year-old Jake Morrison, the wilderness was a place governed by natural law. As an experienced woodsman, he viewed every strange sound as a biological puzzle with a logical solution. He didn't have room in his world for ghost stories. That skepticism led him to a remote section of Oregon known as the Whistling Woods. Local folklore claimed the area was a place where reality began to fray, but Jake saw it as nothing more than a local legend designed to spook tourists. He hiked 10 miles into the deep timber, setting up his tent by a small creek. He chose this specific isolation to enjoy the quiet, confident that the only things surrounding him were the trees and the wind. This absolute reliance on rational physics was his greatest asset in the wild. It also left him completely unprepared for a predator that refused to follow those same rules. Around midnight, a soft whistle echoed through the trees. 3 short, distant notes. Jake checked his watch, 12:17 a.m., and assumed another hiker was nearby. He returned to his sleeping bag, expecting a normal morning. But the tracks he found at sunrise didn't belong to any animal. Human-like but massive, they moved in perfect circles around his tent while he slept. The tracks offered no trail, vanishing instantly at the edge of the woods. A predator leaving no trace. Jake was a marked target. He continued his trip, but the isolation of the forest was no longer a choice. It was a condition of the hunt. By the second evening, the forest fell into an unnatural silence. Jake reached a grove of massive pine trees where the wind died and insects stopped chirping, creating a total dead zone of sound. At midnight, the 3 short whistles returned, much closer than before. When Jake shined his flashlight into the timber, he saw a figure standing at least 8 feet tall. Its body was a void of blackness that blended into the pine bark, leaving only a pale face to reflect the moonlight before it vanished behind a trunk. The encounter became more disturbing the next morning. Every photograph Jake had taken of the mysterious footprints had been deleted from his camera. All other images from his trip were untouched, but the specific proof of the entity had been methodically erased. The predator was now actively manipulating Jake's environment. By stripping away his physical evidence, it began to isolate his mind, forcing him to question his own reality. Jake attempted to flee, but the forest began to loop. Despite hiking for hours towards civilization, he repeatedly passed the same broken signpost he had seen miles earlier. His navigation tools failed entirely. The GPS lost its signal, and the compass needle began spinning in wild circles, as if the magnetic poles of the woods were shifting around him. Then the whistles began to move. The newts sounded from behind him, then instantly in front, then from the left and right. The entity was moving at impossible speeds, physically herding Jake deeper into the thickest part of the timber. The forest itself had become a trap. The entity used spatial disorientation to exhaust Jake, breaking his sense of direction, until he was forced toward a specific destination. Panicked and exhausted, Jake reached a clearing and found an abandoned cabin. Desperate for any kind of barrier between himself and the trees, he rushed inside the rotting structure. The walls were covered in decades of carved warnings from those who had been there before. He found names dating back 50 years, and one recurring message that froze his blood. It knows your name. Suddenly, a whisper drifted from the darkness outside the cabin. A voice that sounded identical to Jake's began calling his name, drifting from the windows to the roof and under the floorboards, trying to lure him back into the woods. The hunt relies on this final psychological collapse. The entity waits for the moment the victim's mind breaks, hoping the prey will eventually choose to walk out and surrender to the dark. At sunrise, the sounds stopped. Jake waited an hour before stepping outside to find a hiking trail less than 50 yards away, a path that had not existed the night before. He reached a ranger station and told his story. The rangers exchanged looks of recognition, eventually admitting that hikers had been vanishing in that section of the forest for decades. Unofficially, every ranger knew the stories of the tall figure and the mimicked voices. Officially, however, none of these reports exist. The lack of a public record means the Whistling Woods remain a popular destination, ensuring that a continuous stream of unsuspecting hikers wanders into the entity's territory every year. Jake escaped the forest, but he couldn't leave the encounter behind. He never returned to the woods, yet the psychological link between the hunter and the hunted remained intact. Every October, around midnight, he still hears those 3 short whistles outside his home, miles away from the Oregon timber. He never sees anyone in the darkness, but he knows the presence is there. Some forces in the wilderness defy any rational explanation, and once you have been marked, the hunt continues.